You worked for a company that was fixing bread prices.
I was the only lifeguard in the projects. Oh, yeah, come on, man.
You worked for a company that was fixing bread prices.
Yeah. My good friend Joe, and he is a good friend. He's received contributions from 44 billionaires. Pete, on the other hand, is trailing, Pete. You only got 39 billionaires contributing. So, Pete, we look forward to you. I know you're an energetic guy and a competitive guy to see if you can take on Joe on that issue. But what is not,
What happened is that some of our philosophers got off base. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites. So that love is identified with a resignation of power and power with a denial of love. It was this misinterpretation that caused the philosopher Nietzsche, who was the philosopher of the will to power, to reject the Christian concept of love. It was the same misinterpretation which induced Christian theologians to reject Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power in the name of the Christian idea of love. Now, we got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best. Power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. I'm Michael Brooks. We're broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where we say solidarity with Glenn Greenwald, with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
On this week's program, Justin Jackson. He's a running back for the LA Chargers. He's also a brilliant, dope political analyst on Twitter. And we're going to be talking about how he got into politics, what his thoughts on 2020 are, his insights on Libya. Very much looking forward to having him on the show. And then Brandon Sutton, BJ Sutton, host of The Discourse. He's joining us in studio. He hosts that excellent show, which you all should join. We're going to be talking about MLK's not only radical legacy, but this incredible synthesis of power and love that we all need to be looking at and thinking about right now, how to properly contextualize it. What does the fierce urgency of now mean in 2020? And also, we'll be touching on Joe Biden. Some choice interview clips from him today. We're going to talk about Hillary Clinton. She's just trash.
I've had great conversations with Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Harvey Weinstein. But Bernie Sanders is a grumpy Joe. See you on Hulu.
I pull very poorly on Little St. James Island.
Yeah, exactly. To be fair, I will say on the global pedophile island that Bill Clinton visited, I was not very popular. We will be talking about that and also why Elizabeth Warren's general election prospects are terrifying from a new analysis from Matt Karp. The new NAFTA, bad for the environment. The Luanda leaks. The Western role in oil corruption across the continent of Africa. And the failing New York Times, folks, David Feldman. David Feldman of the amazing podcast,
The Lib Whisperer.
The Lib Whisperer. David Feldman, host of the great podcast, The David Feldman Show, also a writer, first and foremost, for Triumph the Insult Comic Dog, will be joining us to explain the New York Times endorsement. And then, of course, we have a debunk and a whole bunch of other stuff to get to in the post-game. Jam-packed show. And we'll get to the plugs soon as well. And, of course, the shout-out and the gem. You know it all. But first, let's talk about Martin Luther King Jr. He continues to inspire and guide us for a lot of very, very important and salient reasons. So one is that we all need to continue each year and each day to sort of correct the record about him. He was a radical. He was somebody fundamentally committed to human liberation, democracy, economic and racial justice, and anti-imperialism. He was extraordinarily courageous in his physical courage in his fight against American apartheid, against Jim Crow, and for civil rights. He was enormously morally courageous to earn the scorn of liberal and establishment America by opposing the LBJ genocidal war on Vietnam. This was his true legacy. And the other thing was that he actually had an incredible theological mind. And as you saw in that cold open, a really deep and profound understanding of dialectics and different dynamics, the relationship between power and love that is elemental to getting it right today, politically, economically, morally, and spiritually. He created unity within a struggle for justice, but never was apologized for or was conciliatory for injustice. Many who want to defang his legacy by excluding the truly radical nature of his politics. Let's get a little reminder of those radicalism when it comes to economic justice here.
We read one day, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty and the possibility for the pursuit of happiness. He merely exists.
He didn't separate these struggles. He preached a synthesis that made clear that justice doesn't just mean absence of harm, but a sharing of power, political and economic. He also understood to achieve the society, we need a radical and core shift of our values. In his address to the Riverside Church, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence in 1967, he wrote this. He said this, "I'm convinced that to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, The giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. This is a absolutely perfect diagnosis of Trump's America in 2020. And of course, where we've been for decades after the assassination of MLK and the FBI terror campaign against him and the entire civil rights movement. But this should make us think, first, about his full radical legacy and how we realize and achieve it today, and who's carrying it on today in modern politics globally. Secondly, we need to look at the spiritual and philosophical message, regardless of whether or not you're a Christian or an atheist or anything else. Understanding those dynamics and understanding those ideas is fundamental to that value shift so that we don't replicate all of those poisonous patterns embodied in capitalism inside our own movements and dynamics. This is another deep insight he had. And it's also in embracing him fully as a person, not some sort of airbrush saint figure, a flawed, struggling, and incredibly courageous human being. With racism on the rise, U.S. militarism engaging endlessly overseas, there's no doubt that this revolution in values is deeply needed. And we also face a fundamental attack on our humanity from Silicon Valley, where they hope to turn us into algorithms, where the fusion of sort of micro customization and the complete elimination of, on one hand, this is what Evgeny Morozov has so brilliantly articulated. On one hand, a complete reduction to individual, isolated, atomized human experiences with a blind, reductionist, quote unquote, objective metrics that eliminate historical, social, political, economic, and moral understandings. So on one hand, micro delivered experience just for you, outside of community, outside of context. And on the other hand, the quote unquote mass objective deployment of, as an example, things like facial recognition technology, which, as we all know, will be an enormous threat and an increasing of racism and the abuses of the criminal justice system, as well as an overall threat to already totally depleted privacy and civil liberties. We must break out of this isolation and the exhausted, destructive neoliberal capitalist ideology behind it. The hopelessness of capitalist realism that no real change is possible and that decision-making should be concentrated in the hands of the wealthy elite is a cultural idea that is pumped out by Silicon Valley and other prime predatory industries. We must do better and present a vision that strives to balance and synthesize love and power, that knows how to build up while never compromising on the question of justice. There's no role model for how to do it than the actual, true, and living revolutionary legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Do you guys want to add anything to that?
I just hit that, I've had the opportunity to go back, as, I hope that many people were able to do, and watch some of MLK's speeches. And I think that he was really able to hit that synthesis when he talked about racism and capitalism. He had the speech is escaping me right now, but he had this great speech talking about how there was no proper after slavery there was not this the promise like 40 acres and a mule, and this failure to basically allow black people in this country to be able to stand up on their own 2 feet. Meanwhile, at the same time, the United States government was pushing its army through the West and literally giving away land to white settlers. Right. So this idea that, like,
in the wake of genociding,
of course, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But this idea, that the U.S. government doesn't help out people, doesn't help out like large sections of the population, is completely false. And he's able to do that in a way that I think was very constructive, where he's able to highlight, like, yes, there is economic justice and there is racial justice, and oftentimes, those two things are going to hit ahead without this kind of false consciousness that some people think there's like these are two separate issues, and then when they talk about racialized capitalism, they lose the kind of grand narrative of like the American capitalist system.
We've been this project of sort of mythologizing and historicizing MLK to sort of reveal the economic egalitarian side of him we feel like we're winning that, don't we, over the last
Yeah,
decade or so?
I think so.
I think it's like that conversation's changed a lot. I feel like even just in my conscious living memory of
Definitely.
it.
I agree. Also, an incredible tactician. I mean, his understanding of media, his understanding like why they're all, they're wearing suits, they're, how things were presented and interpreted visually is another great and brilliant hard-headed tactic that we need to learn from him as well. All right, let's go to the shout out.
Which one do you want?
Well, tickle me with a feather. Your shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out. This is the nervous
My
curtains
brain
one,
is
right?
still in recovery mode.
Shout out.
From taking
Oh,
in
we
so
should
many
have
high-level
done. Could somebody get the
ideas.
meme that Ad and did?
From taking in so many high-level important
Let's
ideas.
find that.
The dial of
Should be on
ideas. I like talking about
Twitter
ideas.
timeline.
High-level. The exchange of ideas. Shout out. High-level. Still in recovery mode. Looking forward to sharing more ideas.
That always sells it. So last week we talked about Moms for Housing in Hokeland, who had been highlighting the homelessness crisis and the predatory nature of the real estate industry. And they were targeting one particular real estate speculator that specialized in flipping houses. And the police were called on them. There was a violent and brutal response that removed them from the home, and their accurate diagnosis of the injustice and physical courage galvanized a lot of people across the country in solidarity with their incredible activism. Let's follow up on that. And there's obviously infinitely more to go, including things like we need immediately, like national rent control, like serious public housing option, and so on. But this is a great win for Moms for Housing, which is this incredible group in Oakland. They have apparently reached a good faith agreement. I'm going to read from their tweet now. A good faith agreement has been reached to sell the vacant Oakland house that several homeless mothers used as a residence for nearly 2 months before being evicted last week in a contentious dispute with law enforcement. And then it opens to a San Francisco Chronicle article. Let's open that. Moms for Housing reached deal to, oh man. All right. Anyways, the point is that they have reached. I want people to keep following this because it's a tenant. It's an agreement in principle to basically for the sale of the West Oakland house to a nonprofit that would basically keep the mothers in this home under a quote. I'm quoting that from the article. Under a quote, good faith agreement. It's the second paragraph. You could scroll down. Announced Monday, Wedgwood Properties, which is the real estate predator, which specializes in house flipping, will negotiate the sale with the Oakland Community Land Trust, a nonprofit organization that acquires land and property for affordable housing, said the office of Mayor Libby Schaaf. Schaaf helped arrange the deal that requires the 3-bedroom, 1-bath house on 2928 Magnolia Street to sell for no more than its appraised value. And there's going to be some other steps that need to take place. We need to stay very closely on this issue. But again, this is an example of people power. This is an example of human courage in the face of human exploitation, capitalist exploitation, and a victory. We can win, and we must win. Shout out to Moms for Housing in Oakland. That's awesome. All right, this is the meme that I think it was ad infinitum. Is that right? I love this one. This is so good. 1 second. No, it's not Greta Thunberg. Okay.
Yeah, ad infinitum.
Ad infinitum. All right, I love it. If you're watching, if you're listening, I'll say at the top we've got very classically stupid Dave Rubin going Bolsonaro, and then
Bolsonaro.
one more time.
Bolsonaro.
And then a beaming Brian Muir and myself as I shake hands with the man himself, Lula da Silva. We'll, of course, talk about the disgraceful and illegitimate persecution by the Brazilian regime that they were attempting on Glenn Greenwald. All solidarity with Glenn Greenwald. Glenn responded to these charges in typical fearless fashion. But let's do a little bit of a pitch, and then we're going to get to our friend Justin Jackson. Guys, lead us through the pitch a little bit. Talk about why they should become patrons. Talk about all of the insane amounts, really 2-to-1 bonus content they get. They get the whole TMBS experience.
Yeah, I mean, become a patron, and you'll have access to not only the post game, which we do immediately after this show, where you can call in and ask questions through our IM service and things like that. We also are creating illicit histories and Sunday shows that come out every Sunday. There's a really interesting one coming up with Daniel Bessner on the different futures that are available to us going forward. We are able to take deep dives into politics and history. On Mondays, I do a quick reading list where you're able to jump into different kinds of socialist and left-wing philosophy and history. And, we're also building this whole movement, and we're continuing to grow, and we've only been able to do that because of everyone's support. And, seriously, if you're enjoying this content, you're going to get triple the amount, and you're also going to support the show, which is a very important thing to do.
It's incredibly important. That's how we can do, get out everything from correcting the record on like the Sanders campaign to introducing people to, say, Thomas Sankara or the work of Milton Alamati. Matt.
You also get early access to our live show announcements, like the one that we have on February 7th at the Bell House in Brooklyn here.
Yes, guys, we're in that crunch phase now where the tickets are growing incredibly quickly. There's only a handful of VIP tickets left. So definitely, if you want VIP, buy them tonight. And then, I don't know, we sold out Philly. We're on a similar trajectory with this one. So I would go snag them as quickly as possible and not take the risk of missing it. I'm so excited. The great, the amazing Alona Minkowski. One of our guides, Harvey K. Our buddy Ben Burgess. Brandon Sutton, who's coming here tonight. Brilliant. The Discourse is one of the smartest podcasts in the game. And he's a really funny guy. And then, of course, Matt Binder, host of Doomed, another podcast you should definitely check out. And frankly, some nostalgia for a certain type of head out there. So grab your tickets today. And then let's go to TMBS.fm for just a second. We're going to do, because we've been really light, I want to just talk a little bit more here about the pitches. All right. Within the book I was actually just finalizing covers for the Zero Books book, Against the Web, the Cosmopolitan Socialist Answer to the New Right, is coming out in either late February or early March at the latest. You can check out on the website a blurb page. We've got blurbs from the greats. Some really heavy hitters. Anna Kasparian, Glenn Greenwald, Bill Fletcher Jr., Marissa Baradarin, and Crystal Ball. I'm totally honored by such brilliant, on-point people. Then we've got our catalog here. We are going to be mailing out, for those of you, there's already been plenty of orders. We're mailing stuff out beginning early next week, and we're also going to have gear for people to buy at the Bell House live show. And the next live show, I'll give you a date. It's April 3rd. Who it's with and where it's at, we're going to be announcing tomorrow. When you buy this gear, first of all, it looks good. Lula liked it. His girlfriend threw on the hoodie during the interview. It was so bad. We were like in the middle of an interview, and I think if I was interviewing anybody else besides Lula, I would have been like, "Can somebody get a picture, please?" And then, of course, these are either the one that we couldn't union produce is living wage, full benefits, good conditions, and then everything else is union made. Buy it, helps the show, helps us grow out, do a lot of things we need to do, including things like the video illicit histories. TMBS.fm to get all the information you need, including the clothing catalog. Patreon.com/TMBS to become a member today. And if you are watching this and you haven't yet, for God's sake, click subscribe and click the bell so you get the notifications. And if you want, hit us with a super chat, because YouTube is effing us royally this month, as they do, of course, all independent media creators. So we are well off track for our YouTube goals, which is why, first and foremost, become a patron. That's the way the whole thing works. That's the way the business is. That's the way the movement moves. But if you can, help us at least sort of equalize the YouTube stuff, because it is important, even though the platform is problematic. All right, folks, we're going to take a brief break. We'll be right back with Justin Jackson, political commentator, running back for the LA Chargers.
You worked for a company that was fixing bread prices.
Politics has gotten just so out of whack, but it's going to come back and whack.
Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now, it's a pleasure to welcome for the first time on this show, Justin Jackson. He's a running back for the LA Chargers. He's an educator of neurotanzin on Twitter and many other things. Justin, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me on.
Justin, I mean, how did you get into politics? And I just want to say, maybe we'll talk for a little bit about this neurotanzin thing, because I don't spend a lot of time on this show like recounting like Twitter beefs and battles and stuff like that. But what really jumped out about that one was that you schooled her on Libya.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about it.
Right. So how did I get into politics? Well, it really was in the 2016 election. I was, 18 at the time. Mm-hmm. And the school I went to, Northwestern, there's a lot of very, socially conscious, not as much politically conscious, but I mean, at that age, you're kind of just coming to your own politically, kind of breaking away from that thought of just like, oh, whatever my parents are is what I am. Right. But because we have a lot of those conversations in the locker room and because obviously it was such a huge spectacle, obviously with Trump being a nominee against Hillary, I wanted to do a lot more research, because when we would have those discussions, I really didn't have anything knowledgeable, like politically, historically, to bring to the table as far as like policy, votes, all that type of stuff. I didn't really know any of that. And if you watch mainstream media, you won't know any of that, because they don't talk about any of that stuff. All they ever talked about was Trump's tweets and all that type of stuff. Really basically just like TMZ or E-News. Like that's basically what mainstream media was at the time. Yeah. So I had to go to independent media to actually get educated on a lot of these different topics. So I could, bring, knowledge to a discussion. And that's really what motivated me. And unfortunately it was after the primary. Obviously if I had been paying attention before the primary, I would have been a staunch supporter of Bernie. But it was really a kind of an awakening for me, because I figured out that, a lot of the stuff that Hillary had voted for and what she supported, I didn't agree with, And I'm like sitting here like, oh, I think I'm a Democrat, but I don't agree with any of the stuff that she's done and all the stuff she's pushed. So like, what am I? So it was kind of like that political awakening to kind of find out that, I agreed with Bernie's platform and really progressive policy proposals and that type of stuff. So that's kind of how I came to my own politically.
Before we get to this thing, can you talk a little bit more like what's going on in those locker room conversations? Like, what are people talking about and thinking about? Because, you know, first of all, that's just interesting in and of itself, like any conversations people are having on the job. And I think also a lot of people are noticing that in general, like sports are getting very political again. And there's so many cases where people in sports, I think, are making better calls like than, you know, any other like pop culture industry, basically. So like, what are those conversations like? What are people talking about? What are they saying? What are they thinking? How broad a range are the opinions?
It's actually pretty broad, you know, and I think it's a little different now in the NFL. We don't have as much time. You know, when we're at work, we are working most of the time. And, you know, people have families and stuff afterwards. A lot of people, you know, you go back with your family. You have a few buddies you hang out with on the team, but college is really different because you're around those guys, you're living with those guys, you're eating with those guys, going to class with those guys, workouts all off season. You know, you're in the locker room for a lot of times. So you get really, really close to these guys, and then you kind of get more comfortable having these discussions. And like I said, a lot of the discussions we had, at least in Northwestern locker room, were much more about social issues as opposed to political issues. Like I said, I don't think a lot of people at that age we just hadn't paid attention too closely yet. But they could turn into yelling matches. You know, a lot of people would bring up some stuff that some other people didn't know, and then you know, the other side's like, "Ooh, I don't really know how to respond to that," type thing. Yeah. So it was really interesting, and the dichotomy was there between, you know, people that were technically like socially conservative leaning. You know, we had a lot of guys from the South, Texas, Georgia, Florida. And obviously we had a lot of guys from California and you know, obviously Chicago, and just more liberal, you know, New York, more liberal places. So there was an interesting dichotomy present. So I definitely, that was like my first introduction to kind of debating issues and actually trying to bring knowledge to those debates. So it's tough to say you're going to win a debate because, like, I mean, we're all brothers, we all love each other and everything, but we really do have differences on issues. But it's always good to actually bring some knowledge into those debates, and that's kind of what has informed me. And I've done all this research, so that's kind of what you saw.
Sorry to interrupt, but like, what did you, when you started looking out and doing your own research, what did you start reading and watching and listening to?
Yeah, like I said, I really started with, you know, like independent media sources, not only in print but video. So you know, like TYT, like Secular Talk, like Sam's show, and then as far as like print sources, more like The Intercept, The Nation. Just like, you know, actual, you know, places where like Democracy Now, like places where I actually felt like they were giving some actual insight into issues and not just kind of talking about character flaws of Trump or Hillary, you know what I mean? So I think that's something that really informed me because I really wanted to know like what the urge for people to vote for someone like Trump, like what the urge was for that, like what the urge was behind that, you know, that inclination, because obviously those character flaws are there, but people were willing to look past that. And I wanted to know why. And so I had to actually go into the history politically and what really brought us as America to that moment in 2016, to where we had the choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, obviously two of the most despised politicians, favorability rating wise that we've ever had. So I definitely want to dig deeper into, you know, why we got to that point.
How did you start arguing with Neera Tanden about Libya?
So Neera, I think, is a very polarizing figure.
I think that's true.
Within the Democratic Party. But I think, and obviously she's been an advisor to Hillary for a long time, and she was one of the main Bernie bashers, main bashers of the left, main bashers of anyone who dared to criticize, you know, her queen, Hillary Clinton. But what was so telling, or what is so telling about Neera, and it even showed, and after I tweeted and everything, is she just immediately blocked me, right? And it's this elitist groupthink that has like, okay, I don't know you, you're not in my circle, so your voice doesn't matter, I'm just going to block it out. right? And that's really, that ideology is what Hillary's campaign was kind of running on, right? Like once Bernie was out of the primary, it was kind of like, all right, whatever those progressive issues Bernie was pushing for, whatever they're done, we're going to run on fracking, we're going to run on, just improve Obamacare, we're going to run on, or we can't even get to a $15 minimum wage, even though Hillary Clinton gets $500,000 for a 1 hour speech, but you don't deserve $15 an hour for honest work. Like all that type of stuff, they kind of just threw that to the side and thought, well, Trump's on the other side, so you have to vote for me. And so just that mode of thinking is something that I think she embodies, and also just that whole wing of the party, that centrist wing of the party, elite wing of the party, kind of embodies, and I think she's a perfect personification for that.
And you also, you pulled this thing based off of a WikiLeaks revealed, document that basically she was talking, right. And whatever, I guess kind of flippantly, not in a policy setting, but like essentially that the Libyans should pay us back for overthrowing Gaddafi with oil. Now, right. I don't know, like, does she mean like the Libyans that now are openly buying and selling human beings in restored slave markets? Right. Like, they might have some capital to throw around. Does she mean the warlord in one part of the country, or the government that's tentatively, or, the different factions that are fighting proxy war between, Turkey and Russia right now? I don't know who we're talking about, but that kind of mindset, it caught me, one, because again, it was a deep catch, that isn't like just a standard, like, oh, you say this, but this poll number is different or whatever. That really matters, and also that was something that people said about Iraq all the time. That actually used to be like an acceptable liberal position. I think Dick Durbin used to say that, like, hey, we went in there, we did this job, they should give us the oil. Not even considering like, well, nobody asked you to, invade, or, very few people did. And you actually, killed a lot of people, caused a lot of problems by doing these things.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So the destabilization of the Middle East, which has been obviously caused by United States foreign policy over the last few decades, has been something that has just completely bankrupted our country. And not to speak of the thousands, if not millions of lives that not only have been affected, but people that have died overseas. And then you have people like Neera Tanden talking about repayment through oil, which, like you said, all these different factions are in Libya right now. So it's really not any type of repayment. It's just, we're just going to take those resources from that country, which is really why we wanted to overthrow Gaddafi in the first place, is like why we want to overthrow any dictator, I put that in air quotes, because they're trying to nationalize the oil and reap those profits for their own people, which is why you see why they were trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government, and why they're trying to overthrow the Iranian government, right? So these are very, and it's like the same playbook, right? And so now we see, like, you can't, before they can do that, they could kind of work in back rooms and back channels, but really through the rise of social media and shows like yours and other independent media sources, people are actually getting real news that, you won't see on the corporate media channels. So now we can actually see that. And now we actually have a president that will just go on TV and say, yeah, we were going in there to take the oil, right?
Right.
And so it's almost good that we can see that at face value and then fight back against that. And obviously Neera and them, those emails really revealed how they think, right? Because they have all these, back channels and ways of talking about stuff that don't reach the public because they've already modified the message so much. But we really got to have an inside look into how they think about these things, and really just the corruption and rot that is within that elitist neoliberal groupthink.
You feeling the burn?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Talk about it.
100%. I really think, and I truly believe this, I think Bernie is the only candidate we have right now that can save America from going off the cliff that I believe we're driving towards.
Yeah.
Because these corporate neoliberal policies mixed with neocon, far right-wing reactionary policies have pushed the country to such a point where however many people, over 70%, live paycheck to paycheck. People can't afford their insulin. They're crippled with student debt. I have a lot of family members. My dad's still paying off student debt. He went to DeVry technical school and he's going to be 50. He's still paying off student. Like, it's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. So all these different things that Americans are stressed, all the stress that they have to deal with because of finances are because of the policies that have been pushed by our government really since the 80s, when you start trickle-down economics and Reaganomics and all the tax cuts and all that type of stuff. So I really think Bernie is the only candidate pushing a platform with a movement behind him that can really enact the change, the urgent change we need to move forward, not to mention climate change, which obviously is a huge, that crisis is a huge thing looming very near in the future. So I really think that Bernie's the only one that's going to be able to do that. And it's really not a cult of personality. And that's what I think a lot of people love about Bernie is he's just him, right? He's this like kind of disgruntled old man who has just been fighting for the same things for 30, 40 years, but finally people are starting to listen to him. And it's and I just love the direction of his campaign, because he's bringing so many people in who weren't paying attention or just stopped believing in politics, stopped believing in the, that change can actually happen from the government level through a movement of the people. So I just really love that, just the aura around his campaign and the really the diversity of his campaign and how it's a working class, poor people driven campaign.
That's awesome. I hope they do a video with you if you're up for it. I think you put it as good as it could be put. First of all, I want to thank you, man, and I hope that you'll come back on again. And I just want to ask you
for sure.
two quick questions before you run off.
Sure.
On the off season, if you ever come to New York, please come in studio and hang out with us. David Griscom would like to challenge you to a push-up contest. I just wanted to relay that to you. I mean, that's on him.
I'm pretty good at that, but
I would think so. But look, but that's just for David. I don't feel I can do push-ups, absolutely, but I'm not challenging you. That's just David is challenging you on that. That's number one. So
man, all right, athletic challenge, let's do it. I'm down.
All right, so he's up for push-up contest with you, David, and then I hesitate to ask you this, but is that it for the Patriots, man? Is the era over?
Oh man, I don't know. It seems like Brady's ready to move on, what's so interesting about that is, right, he's won 6 championships there. Like, think about that. He's won 6 championships there, and him and the coach still don't get along. That is wild to me. That is just crazy. Like,
that is pretty wild.
Gives you an insight into Belichick and his mindset, and it's different, man. The Patriots, they're a different organization, but that's why they're so successful. So we'll see. It might be a shakeup this year when it comes to this offseason when it comes to quarterbacks. So it'll definitely be interesting to watch.
That's politics right there.
Exactly.
Very political answer, my friend.
I think about these things.
Justin Jackson, I really, really appreciate your time, man. And obviously running back for the LA Chargers, and definitely someone people should be following on Twitter, and somebody who thinks, really clearly about politics. And it's awesome. Justin, thanks, man.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you, Mike. You guys have a good show, all right?
Absolutely. Take care. Ready, David?
Maybe it's
That's very dangerous.
Just both me and David versus it.
We should all just do it. Let's just do like Justin versus TMBS. Yeah. And then we'll just the contest for runner-up. That will be where all the energy is. That would be really funny.
I meant we all combine our totals.
Oh, we all combine our totals so he can beat us in a landslide. That's awesome. All right. Look, it's time for a gem.
Yeah. Hold on.
You got it?
Yeah. Ooh. I like that. A little more high energy.
You want to try it? Try it. Try the high energy version.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, do that.
All right.
It doesn't. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no. So, I wanted to talk about, there's 2 big trade stories that have been going on this week, and we got to hit them because there's a lot of nonsense going on. So first, let's talk about China and this, what they're calling the Phase 1 agreement, which is essentially just a truce between the United States and China. Obviously, they've been hitting each other with tariffs and really threatening a lot of, economic instability. So, let's really think about what's going on underneath the scenes. First, let's start with Silicon Valley. From the very beginning, this fight with China has really been about technology. They say there's a lot of other issues, but it's about Silicon Valley corporations wanting to have their intellectual property and basically their right to have, monopoly stakes in the global economy protected by the United States is a, powerful political position. And the fact is that China is, a massive economy with a growing tech sector. And of course, that there's going to be conflict between the United States and competition with the United States. So the assumption that, and this was, Richard Wolff talked about this too when he was on the show, this sort of implicit deal with China and U.S. tech companies was, we're going to, you guys can come here and exploit our labor, but we're also going to start learning a little bit and have, access to technology and build our own growing tech sector. And now that China is starting to threaten that, now there's all this, oh my God, the Chinese are thieves and they're stealing. I'm not saying that everything that the Chinese are doing, by the way, is above water, but it's this the general assumption that there's something super malicious about Chinese strategy is absolutely wrong. So what happens when Trump comes in is that Trump just bumbles around and makes a complete fool of himself and really just pushes this conflict to a head and has created this disastrous situation. But the fact is that even with this deal, one of the most important things was that China agreed to a lot more, that they're going to self-police themselves much more when it comes to United States intellectual property for the benefit of Silicon Valley corporations. And let's remember that technology, specifically, is an industry that's very good at protecting its own profits, and it's not the kind that trickles down well at all. So there's been a lot of behind the scenes.
It's a pure artificial scarcity.
Yeah, and it's in a lot of the tech companies, have been behind the scenes sort of lobbying the Trump, government, and a lot of the things that Trump has been doing for them on the long term are probably going to be beneficial. And just real quick too, let's also not forget that, this conflict with China has been boiling for a long time under the water. Obama pushed had the pivot to Asia. And the idea there was that even though there's all these countries that are mainly trading partners of China, the United States was going to use its political power to, reassert itself. And that's what was behind TPP. And lastly, with regards to China, the fact is that, we're seeing a massive trade slowdown, and that was because globalization drove that. And what was the main function? What was one of the driving forces behind globalization was this access to cheap labor in Asia. And what we're seeing is we're actually seeing slowdowns in production across these low-wage areas because it was sort of like a blip that happened in these areas that were very much underdeveloped. And as they start to get developed, that model doesn't work as well. And lastly, about this whole conversation with global trade with China and Asia in general is that when we talk about trade, we need to be talking about climate change. And the fact is that the reason that this model worked at all was because we were shipping everything across the Pacific, and that eats up an incredible amount of energy. And it really has, not just the oil, but the production itself is a huge, has a huge impact on climate change. And of course, Donald Trump and all these people will have no interest in that. Now, I just want to get to this as well too. NAFTA 2 is another great example of this.
Talking
problem.
More about this in the post game.
Yeah, just hitting it real quick is Bernie Sanders is 100% correct to call out the failure of this deal to address climate change. Let's also not forget that even though people like Elizabeth Warren are saying, well, we shouldn't throw out a deal that has mild improvements because it's not perfect. Let's not forget that these deals fundamentally just put corporations and corporate rights above nations. And, if we want to implement the kind of programs that Bernie Sanders wants to implement, these deals will be a problem, and it will be something that we will have to fight against. And that's why Bernie Sanders is absolutely correct to oppose them. The fact is that this economic model is not going to be able to revive itself under the old rules of capitalism. It's not going to be able to revive itself through ridiculous trade deals like NAFTA 2. Bernie Sanders is 100% right to oppose it, and this is a great example of the different trajectory that this leftist, this democratic socialist movement is pushing, because we see this deal it gets bipartisan support. And when you have bipartisan support, that should be something that should make you very nervous. It's exactly what this whole deal has been about, was the status quo, which is that, corporations are running policy in Washington, and you can see that synthesis and that unity when the Democratic Party doesn't even make its stink about Donald Trump, somebody who they're literally trying to impeach. They give him everything he wants when it comes to global trade and the economy. Well, they decry his attitudes and his, behavior or whatever, but no fundamental difference in structure.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of two things I want to maybe just riff on for a few minutes. One we'll get to in a second, which is China and Belt and Road, which we're going to talk about more in the show. But yeah, I mean, just the incredible incoherence around impeachment. And I say that as somebody who, I've said, I'm on record that it's like, sure, I think, I think it's probably the right call. I love the idea of monopolizing his time. I think if it was done in the right strategic way, it could make him bleed. And also, let's be really clear, too. He is bleeding to some extent. Donald Trump's a very unpopular president, right? Like, people need to remind themselves of that. Nobody likes him. Well, actually, she's one of the only people that people like less than Donald Trump. Speaking of which we will get to that nightmare in a couple of minutes. But there's a variety of grounds of critique, right? So one is, why are we not impeaching Donald Trump for having concentration camps, terrorizing migrants? Why are we not? Which, in fact, that is precisely the part of his administration which we can use Gestapo, Nazi, and fascist terminology around without flinching. Disgusting crimes against humanity committed by all of these obscene people. Then, of course, the questions of the I can't pronounce it right now. Emoluments clause and personal corruption, all of that stuff. And then, of course, objectively, this phone call, what he did is obviously, of course, is wrong. In fact, even people who go really hard against both our policy in Eastern Europe and the political wisdom of going after Trump in this way all admit that it's wrong. So none of this is on the table. But the first and more substantive problem is how the Democrats have chosen to go at him without those two other much more primary and serious issues. And the other thing being, again, is just this, we have a slew of things. We've got NAFTA too. We've got them reauthorizing the Patriot Act. We've got them giving him a Space Force. So we actually have even the bureaucratic building blocks, which are already in place, of an increasingly authoritarian state, of a fusion of the national security state in Silicon Valley and absolutely unprecedented, dangerous, alarming, and frankly terrifying ways, all signed off on by a majority of corporate Democrats, which is, we know just as Democrats, even as the hyperventilating about this stuff. Now, again, the dialectic, because I don't want to say that there's nothing there and yada, yada, yada. But it really does. It's extraordinary to me. And I say that as somebody who, everybody in this room, we take beating Donald Trump more seriously than Paul Krugman does, which is why we want to be clear about Joe Biden's record as an example.
I would just add to just generally about impeachment, is that when it comes down to what the political process for actually impeaching a president is, right, there's still a lot of questions of the actual removal from office when it comes to the president. And in my opinion, you're not going to be able to do that unless you can make a case that is so strong that it actually invigorates so many American people that they are also demanding for the president, to step down, to get out of office.
Or at the very least, it's seriously making him bleed.
But the way that the Democrats have pushed this impeachment, it's so technical. It's so, there's a certain group of people who like it, people who like, long legal dramas maybe. But, for the average American, these are the crimes that they're bringing up. And there's plenty of crimes that you could bring up that would have this reaction with people. They're not the kind of thing that inspires that anger and that frustration that is going to be necessary to pursue at a successful impeachment. And there's a reason for that. It's because the crimes that Donald Trump is guilty of are crimes that, for the most part,
allegedly,
the corporate wing of the Democratic Party are also complicit in. And they don't want to draw political attention to that. And, that's a political reality that we have to face right now. I think that, I'm all happy to see Donald Trump impeached. Don't get me wrong at all. But you see who's driving it, and this is a massive problem.
Yeah, right. I listened to do my due diligence as a producer. I listened to the New York Times impeachment podcast once, one episode. It had Emily Bazelon on.
Strong producing.
And
hey man, I take my job seriously. I listened to one episode of the time.
It was terrifying because they talked about that whole thing about the decision to keep it narrowly focused on this Ukraine stuff when there's a whole bunch of different things they could just add.
And what did they say about that?
And all they could say to it was, I understand why Emily Bazelon said this. I understand why some people are, upset about this, but this is the way that they're going to go. Okay, so there's just no actual like analysis into what that is.
Right.
Mainly because like Democrats are like cucks, basically.
Yeah, they're and the other thing too that I just couldn't, You
gotta just make one more quick point, which is that then they moved on to like, well, what does this all mean? And so I'm like, okay, here's what this means. And then it's like, well, now we wait to see what the polls do. And if this looks good enough for Democrats, maybe we get 3 or 4 more to like be gung-ho about or whatever it was, right? And it's like, we're already just poll watching already in this process.
I mean, that's what it is. And then, of course, we know, like, so no Republican's going to vote for this. And if I had to put money down, Sinema and Manchin will vote against it. So and possibly Doug Jones, definitely Sinema and Manchin are two of the worst people in U.S. politics. Like, we're going to need to get to know them because they are horrible. They are political, public enemies. So, how will it then play when Trump can run around the country saying like, two Democrats, and people won't know, of course, that these are, extreme far-right politicians with, pro-Trump records. I also just think that during one of the hearings, there were all of these law professors coming out and doing like, including real melodramatic, like, you tell Russia to butt out of our elections stuff. Yeah. And here's the thing. I think there's definitely people who identify on the left who actually really underestimate the profound importance that even if liberal democracy is a fiction, that maintaining that fiction is protecting a lot of important things, if that makes sense. So there's degrees of things, and ripping the mask off completely harms a lot of people. Now, it makes things more transparent about how structurally harmful everything is. But I'm not somebody who wants to just say like, yeah, man, like whatever, who cares, right? Like there are, and when I first talked to the people from like the Workers' Party in Brazil, that was the first thing they were saying, like, yeah, you guys have circuit breakers going back hundreds of years. We're a modern republic created in the late 80s. We don't have the level of institutional protection, possibly. And as much as it's the wrong political strategy, there were plenty of courts that initially rejected the Muslim ban as an example, right? So I want to always put that in the mix. But at the same time, watching very highly respected legal minds and intellectuals sitting there talking like they got their moment on some type of like grade C TV drama about the Russians and our democracy. Let me just say, even really narrowly, I don't even need to go to socialist grounds. If you could still be talking about that after Bush v. Gore, when we saw a presidential election get stolen. One candidate not only won the popular vote, but Al Gore would have won Florida if it was popularly counted. And the Supreme Court, they used a reading of the 14th Amendment, which they're constantly trying to undermine so they can go after civil rights cases. And they even wrote, people should look up this lead decision. They even wrote in the lead decision, like, don't use this for future cases. This is a one-off that we are using to protect George W. Bush's civil rights about quote-unquote double standards in voting count. If you can, a couple of decades after that, not to mention, of course, the research from Princeton about how we're not in a democracy, all this stuff, and still just be like, the answer is you butt out, Mr. Putin. It's not only embarrassing, it's terrifying, because it really does show that in the liberal mindset, there is an analogous set of delusions. Yeah. to the conservative one.
No, I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. And, you know, what we're seeing right now is, I mean, even just watching this, you know, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but watching this whole grand parade of like the New York Times endorsement, like there has been, but like there has been like a real loss of like strategy and like understanding of politics or even understanding the political moment right now. And this, I just feel like this impeachment fail. You know I feel like Donald Trump is like a once in a lifetime opportunity for an opposition party, because he's like so obviously corrupt. He's so obviously evil. He's so obviously wicked. He's so obviously incompetent. And you see the failure of the people who are in control of the Democratic Party to be able to use this as an opportunity to benefit themselves. And as somebody who watches politics closely, it's endlessly frustrating. As somebody who cares about people in this country, who is so worried when you see these kind of horrible racist attacks that have been, you know, growing under Donald Trump, and these movements to attack, you know, Iranian people and Muslim people. I mean, it's very frightening. And
they don't even oppose him on Iran or Venezuela. I mean, we were just talking about the policy set. You have a co-signing on surveillance state, warmongering, and corporate-friendly trade deals that don't even mention climate. And then, of course, butt out, Mr. Putin. It's insane. I mean, it's honestly, it is so delusional. And, you know, I'm glad you brought up the Times endorsement. We'll talk about it more later. But it's like, you know, this Bernie Sanders stuff, sure, of course you're not going to endorse Bernie Sanders, obviously. You represent a totally different class position. But you can't just say that somebody who has worked for decades in the legislative branch of government, you know, like it's just incredible. Like, what are you going to do to pass an agenda? Well, I'm going to mobilize people in a civic shared struggle to engage in their democratic process. Well, hello, Pol Pot.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so irresponsible.
Honestly, I do think it's irresponsible. I do think much of it is malicious and in bad faith, but I think also a legitimate amount of it is genuinely stupid. It is genuinely people who have not read books, who have gone to certain professional training institutions where they learn to mouth a bunch of cliches and write the right responses on papers, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I went to school in D.C. and I know a lot of those people, not, you know, necessarily people who are at the New York Times editorial board, but like the aspiring,
aspiring,
you know,
aspiring.
And it really is amazing that, you know, people do learn a kind of script. It's like, oh, you know, you're not able to change anything. You know, the only way to get things done is by incremental, smart policy, right? Even though you can point out to those people that the left's trajectory for the past 30 years has been that let's do smart, middle of the road, nothing too radical, nothing too crazy, you know, political tinkering on the edges, and that's how we'll build like this great society. And there's just this complete ignorance of the history. Instead, it's a kind, you know what it is? I mean, it's really, not to get too like psychoanalytic about it, but it's really like, you know, you want the approval of the person in power. So like these kids, they go to schools that, like, you know, their universities, especially like political science departments and economics departments, are just so pushed, filled with like right wingers who have lots of money from, you know, big institutions that are pushing them to push a certain kind of ideology. And these young kids come in there and they want the approval of the professor. So they say, you know what, I'm going to learn like the basic grammar of this argument, and I'm just going to use it as a ready-made argument, regardless of the historical contingencies, regardless of the social movements, regardless of the economic factors. I'm just going to use it over and over, regardless of how much the whole world around you is falling down and everything that you've been taught is wrong. Still, you know, continuing the same kind of argument. I mean, there's something very pathological about it.
Right. That's the word. I'm waiting to hear back from Brandon. He's, I guess, running a few minutes late. So here's what we're going to do. Because he's running a few minutes late, he doesn't get to do... Oh, no. Let's just do one of these. We'll save him one. Which one should we save for him, and which one should we do ourselves?
Oh, God. Let's do the one where he says he was in the civil rights movement.
All right. So Joe Biden is... There's a great book by Branko Marčić. Marčić from Jacobin. We'll have him on. It's called Yesterday's Man. And it's a great book about Joe Biden because it's not just a polemic. It really actually fits him historically coming out of the New Deal, downward mobility in the middle class, where he situates himself politically. A lot of things to be discussed about Joe Biden. Of course, the bankruptcy bill, wanting to cut Social Security, Iraq, the corruption issues around his family. On the other hand, I still think, frankly, being blunt, after Bernie Sanders, I think he might be a better bet to put up against Trump, depressingly. We can talk about that some other time. But one thing that is very clear about Joe Biden's biography, any analysis of Joe Biden, including the most sympathetic one, was that this guy who got his start incredibly early in politics, I believe he was elected to his first office when he was 27 years old, and he had a few liberal leanings on some issues. This was not a member of any movement. This guy was not a hippie. This guy was not taking... Joe Lieberman, one of the biggest scumbags in the history of American politics and the universe, actually was involved in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
So Joe Biden, there's some goodwill. He was Obama's vice president. Here he is at Vice. Again, he doesn't even know. Like, his campaign is not informing him, clearly, because I think he's genuinely I think he genuinely thinks the hosts don't have the right information here. Let's check this out.
Give me a break.
Why is Senator Sanders leading you with black voters under the age of 35?
He is not leading black voters under the age of and look, just all I know is I'm leading everybody combined with black voters.
I'm winning.
You got everybody.
Yeah. Wait. Let's get this straight. Name me anybody who has remotely close to the support I have of the African American community nationally.
Well, actually, Vice News just did a poll that showed that Sanders is a bit behind you, but he does have significant black support. I mean, it's not something to sniff at.
He's way behind.
A bit and a ways is
Oh, yeah. Come on, man. Give me a break.
Pause it. Let's play that again.
A bit and a ways is
Oh, yeah. Come on, man. Give me a break. You know better.
Come on, man, me?
You know better. You know better. There's a reason why I have more support of elected black officials. 3 former members of the chair of the Black Caucus, black mayors. I mean, come on.
Okay, no doubt Joe Biden has racked up endorsements. And of course, that makes total sense. He's racked up plenty of endorsements from plenty of elected officials. But this is the type of thing. And by the way, that Vice poll is real, and that poll does show, of course, I mean, we all know from the beginning that Bernie Sanders leads with all young voters across the board from every single background. But that one did show a lead among young African Americans. And also, more recent polls are showing a general evening up across the board. But I did like, and this is the type of thing that, like, Trump, this racist scumbag, will be able to use that. I mean, because like, oh, come on, man. Trump will say, like, Joe, why are you trying to impersonate Dolomite? Why are you on Vice talking like that? That's weird. Ooh, major yikes, Joe.
Oh, yeah. Come on, man.
Hashtag cringe. Hashtag cringe, Joe.
As the only lifeguard in the projects.
Jesus Christ. That would be an interesting fact check. Come on, man. I was the only lifeguard in the projects. I told Barack the first time I met him, you people can't swim, but maybe you can govern. All right. Anyways, black people love me. All right, exclusive poll. Just as many African Americans say that consider voting for Bernie Sanders as Joe Biden. 55% of African Americans said they'd consider voting for Sanders in 2020, a statistical tie. Although 1 point ahead. Is it 55 or 56, actually?
56.
56, 2 points ahead of 54% who said the same about Biden. So, Joe, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Come on, man.
Oh, my God. So good.
Politics has gotten just so out of whack. But it's going to come back and whack.
Jesus Christ. I think horrible record aside, because politics is also about just temperament, entertainment, and other kinds of bullshit, that pre-senility Joe Biden would have a very good shot at Donald Trump. I think mid-diminishing capacity Joe Biden might be a problem.
Get your words straight, Jack.
Wait, is he mad at something I just said? All right, give me another Biden job. Let's give me something.
I was the only lifeguard in the projects.
That's the best one.
That is the best one. I was the only lifeguard in the projects. Someone
Go
actually.
to Joe 30330.
No, he does. No, the thing is, there is a part that he's always taught. Like some guy in Brazil actually was saying, like he saw some Biden speech in Brazil that ended with like some like weird like homage to like the troops or something. It was just like, what the hell are you talking about, dude? Brandon Sutton is here. BJ Sutton. He has entered the building. Let's take a real quick break and bring the man out. And in a few minutes, David Feldman, who, as some of you may know him, he's hosted the David Feldman Show. He's a writer for Triumph the Insult Comic Dog. He's written for many other comedians. He's a great stand-up comedian himself. He's also one of the biggest Bernie bros on the planet. So it's going to be cathartic to listen to what he has to say about this New York Times garbage. All right, let's take a really quick break, and we'll be right back with the host of The Discourse. Come on, man. Did you hear that Biden drop? I guess you know he was just getting it. Listen to this Biden drop. We got to play the clip again.
Oh yeah, come on, man.
I don't know, being surrounded.
That is in response to a new Vice News poll showing that Sanders has evened up with him with black voters, and he just refuses to believe it. And so he well, you know what? I'm sorry. Indulge us. Let's just play it again for Brandon. It's funny.
The reason why I have more support of elected black officials, 3 former members of the.
Oh, wait. Sorry, that's the wrong clip. That's a different one. That's the one we have yet
just
to
give
play.
him. Just give him the. Come on, man.
Oh, the whole thing.
Well, no, just that.
On a very.
Just that would.
Why is Senator Sanders leading you with black voters under the age of 35?
He is not leading black voters under the age of look. Just all I know is I'm leading everybody. combined with black voters.
I'm winning.
You got everybody.
Yeah. Wait. Let's get this straight. Name me anybody who has remotely close to the support I have of the African American community nationally.
Well, actually, Vice News just did a poll that showed that Sanders is a bit behind you, but he does have significant black support. I mean,
but
it's not something to sniff at.
Me. He's way behind.
A bit and a ways is
Oh, yeah. Come on, man. You know better.
Come on, man, me.
You know better. You know better. There's a reason why I have more support of elected black officials.
All right.
Being surrounded with all those black and brown people is giving Biden a PTSD flashback to that segregated pool.
It comes up later.
His eyes going all wide, and I don't know who that dude is, but he like corn popping in Biden's eye.
It comes up later. Brandon Sutton, he's host of The Discourse. Everybody become a patron immediately. It's one of the best podcasts in the game. You're also going to be with us February 7th. Get your tickets at the Bell House. How excited are you for the show, man?
I'm very excited. Obviously it's your show, so I won't be the center of attention, but I'm excited to be there nonetheless.
You will be a center of attention.
That's only because of my mass.
No, I'm a conduit. I'm a conduit, man. The center of attention goes out to all the great guests like you.
That's great. That's a great way of looking at it.
Absolutely. Figured you'd enjoy it as a narcissist. Brandon, we talked about this. Do you think, obviously there's still the, literally whitewashed and sanitized MLK of cable news and everything. But do you think that we're making headway, at least for some, groups of the population to actually be reminded and understand, no, this was actually a serious political radical?
When it comes to Martin Luther King Jr.?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the younger black and brown people who are, turning out to vote, turning out to become involved in politics at the local and at the national level, you're seeing reckoning with not only their own material conditions, like their own poverty, their own interactions with race, their own interactions with the state and violence of the state, but also I'd say a reflection on the discrepancy between the history of black figures and the whitewashed view of black radicals, MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., and the lesser known ones too, and the sanitized version, right? The version that we are presented in high school, in middle school, in college sometimes, and especially online on the one day of year where you have to be nice to black people. Well, MLK Junior Day and also the NBA Finals, you have to be nice to black people.
Yeah, definitely, right.
And so, I think that people have become...
And in both cases, they go, it was a great effort.
Yeah, you win some, you lose some.
You win some, you lose some.
But, and that's
so fucked up.
That is heartening. You love seeing people, reckon with their own genealogy of, black thought. Obviously the concept, not the canon of academia, and the concept, not like the rapper from fucking The Roots. But, at the same time, you want people to not, especially black people, to not be held to the imaginary standards or just the real standards of Martin Luther King Jr., right? We know where he was in the 60s. We know where he was in the 50s. We know where he was when he died. But we've had an intervening 50 years to develop ideas to look back on that past and say, okay, well, here's what I think he had wrong. Here's what I think he had right. Here's what we can learn. Here's how we can synthesize the new reality. And here's what we have to leave in the past. And so I think for a lot of people, when it comes to MLK Day, people try to transpose Martin Luther King Jr.'s in 1960s onto the present day and say, here's what he would be doing now. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to do that because we know what he was doing then. You can't say, you can say, here's who he would be most likely to find himself politically aligned or in terms of candidates, but we don't know where he would be. But here's what we can say. We can say, well,
I think Pete Buttigieg offers a temperament and moderation. Joe Biden, come on, man. I endorse Joe.
I would pay money to hear Joe Biden recount the history of Martin Luther King Jr. I would pay. There are two things I would pay money to hear Joe Biden do, and I guess both are kind of topical given the time of year. But explain the 7 days of Kwanzaa and Martin Luther King Jr. I want my vehicle into that to be Joe Biden's rambling explanation.
I think it's time for that drop, Matt.
Oh, yeah, come on, man.
That's Joe Biden's response to your proposition.
It's a trick question.
Come on, man. Kwanzaa's a trick question.
It is.
Did you ever actually read Bruce Dixon's writing on the guy who created Kwanzaa?
I have not, but I will say this. I'm pretty sure if you were to ask Joe Biden, he would just say it's like what Lenny Kravitz celebrates.
If he can remember who Lenny Kravitz is. So, so to making MLK like actually, but that's interesting because if you actually make him like an actual political leader and intellectual, which he was, and I would argue also clearly some type of spiritual theological figure, but that makes him actually alive. And then you can contend with him, which is treating him properly, like not some type of weird museum piece or proxy for other people's contemporary politics.
Exactly. You can use him, you can, treat him like a real person, somebody who was in conversation with his own politics and in conversation with the politics of the time, and someone who showed like self-doubt. We know at the time when he was assassinated, he was in many ways grappling with the idea of nonviolence, for one example, like grappling with the viability of nonviolence when it comes to organizing, for liberation, Black liberation, and he was also organizing along class lines too. Like, I think that people point out rightfully that a large part of Martin Luther King Jr.'s, like the canon of his life, the trajectory of his life, was melding an analysis of class and race together, explaining how those two interweave and how liberation of Black people is in many ways rooted in the liberation of them as an economic class. And that kind of gets whitewashed away when we go into the future and goes, okay, well, the March on Washington was a march for racial equality in some sort of vague, overarching way. But what does that actually mean? Like, what does racial equality mean in the context of the March on Washington? What does it mean in the context of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life? What does it mean in the context of the 60s and, in the civil rights era? And, it's sad because even just to be kind of rude, I think, you look at a lot of people who are celebrating Martin Luther King Jr., not just the Republicans, right? Not just the people who obviously would not have been supporting him, but you look at some of the more Democrat-leaning people, the liberals, and you say, hey, we know that part of your own personal mythology, part of the personal mythology of you and the candidates you support is that, like, if you were to be in the 1960s, you would have been on the front lines of the civil rights era. But we know that's not true.
Yeah, we know
that's. It's like we know, like, based on how they react to modern liberation movements, how they react to Black Lives Matter, how they react to Palestine, how they react to any kind of movement by people who are oppressed, in order to like sort of somehow like grapple or, take back power from the state or from, in case of the global South, take back power from America, take back self-agency.
Right. No. And again, of course, like by the end too, I mean, look, when we all know that when he made a class turn, and probably most importantly spoke out against, the, atrocities, the mass murder campaign in Vietnam, he was loathed by the establishment. And of course, we'll do this in the post game, but obviously another culmination of this is, the FBI sending him out a tweet, from presumably from the J. Edgar Hoover Federal Building, the guy who literally tried to get him to commit suicide.
Yeah, I mean, some intern was there, and it was some FBI intern, the Pete Buttigieg of the future, was there, trying to craft the perfect MLK Jr. memoriam tweet, and it was either that or like pick the top 3 emojis that make you want to kill yourself. And
these are the top 3 emojis that J. Edgar Hoover would have sent to MLK if it was today.
Exactly. So I mean, you don't know what he would.
They're still surveilling Black liberation movements today.
They're still they're still. I mean, I don't mind sounding conspiratorial. Like, they're still assassinating Black radicals today. They're like, in many ways, like, the assassination of Black radicals has never really ended. There are basically anyone of any note who was involved in the Ferguson protests has died under mysterious circumstances. And so, I mean, the legacy of MLK, and I would say the unfortunate reality of MLK is, along with the whitewashing, he acts sort of as a waypoint in the past for people to point to and say, okay, here's what racism was. Racism was segregation, de jure segregation, redlining, all those things that were occurring in the past. And now we're here and things are different and racism is gone. But a lot of the things that we were still dealing with in the past have not only stuck around, but they've gotten worse. And they've gotten worse because people, I think, they've gotten worse because the state has gotten more power. It has, solidified, in some ways, its media apparatus has become more solid. It's become more more digital. Its surveillance has become easier, and so now, we're dealing with not only like the same police state, but like on steroids. But we're dealing with people in some ways trying to pretend as though this like that kind of racism is in the past, because that's where Martin Luther King Jr. is, and that's where we've come so far. But have we? Like by what standard? And I think people point to MLK and then they point to Obama and they say, look how far we've come, and it's just like,
have we?
Right.
It's
just like, have we come that far?
We're gonna keep going on this theme, but first we're gonna do. I'm assuming if you're like me, because I know you're also a Bernie bro, that you're pretty disgusted with the New York Times. Maybe, I'm sure you probably weren't surprised, but still disgusted.
It was funny. I have a low level of disgust with the New York Times throughout my day, but then you mean the endorsement?
Yes.
That was funny.
That was funny. Okay, well, I'm pissed, and that's why I wanted to get David Feldman, because David Feldman, I'm amazed. His Bernie passion and his anger, he's livid at the New York Times. So I wanted to give him an opportunity to join us and to vent. He's, of course, host of the David Feldman Show. Everybody subscribe to it now. We're going to take a brief break, and then David Feldman is going to come back and break down the fecklessness, the absolute cowardice of the New York Times editorial board. We'll be right back on The Michael Brooks Show. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now Brendan Sutton says it's funny. I'm disgusted. And joining to commiserate with us on this just embarrassing. First of all, endorsing two candidates in a sort of pathetic pseudo-woke play, totally disrespecting Bernie Sanders, is to help with the catharsis here is David Feldman. He's host of the David Feldman Show, stand-up comedian, writer for any number of people, from Triumph the Insult Comic Dog to Dennis Miller, back in a time when Dennis Miller was funny, they tell me. And he's also a huge Bernie bro, major supporter of the movement. David Feldman, thanks for being here.
Big Bernie bro, from way back, before you were born. I'm a socialist from way back. David Brooks and I belong to the same socialist book club of the book of the month club before you were born.
Oh, okay.
David Brooks, big socialist. Yeah.
What were you guys reading?
The Marx, Engels. I was a red diaper baby. My parents weren't communists. I was born with irritable bowel syndrome, and that's why I was a red diaper. But listen, I'm pissed off. So I don't want to make any jokes here. I'm pissed off. I'm a big Bernie bro. I want to get there just like everybody else. And I'm pissed off at the New York Times. Pissed.
Well, so am I, David.
I called my sister. I said, change your password. I'm no longer using it to log into the New York Times.
Well, I feel
That's how
exactly the
pissed off I
same
am.
way, David.
I'm sorry?
I feel exactly the same way. I'm disgusted and embarrassed.
I was
frankly.
pissed off. I was pissed off. And I got angry because, you know, I'm a big Bernie bro.
Yep.
Big Bernie bro. And I was going to write a letter to the editor, but then I thought, what would Martin Luther King, or would Dr. Martin Luther King do?
Well, I'm sure we were just explaining why saying this sort of thing is maybe not the best approach, but
no, I'm interested.
Okay, all right, yeah, all right. Well, Brandon's interested. By the way, Brandon Sutton is here with us. In case you didn't know.
Yeah, I see Brandon, and I think Dr. Martin Luther King would say, "Let the gray lady talk. Let's hear what the New York Times has to say. There's room for every opinion. Let's take it all in." And I think Dr. Martin Luther King would ask me to reevaluate Bernie, to ask myself, you know, has he alienated women? And as a woke male, I think nobody likes Bernie. I think he doesn't have any friends in the Senate. I think he owes Hillary Clinton an apology for saying during the debates, "Enough with the damn emails." I think when he at the convention, when he put her name, he nominated her by acclamation. When he was out on the campaign trail pushing for Hillary, I thought that was patronizing to women, and he owes her an apology.
Wait a second, Dave. Okay, all right. You know what, David? I'm going to get this. This is like Lucy and the football here. Every time you come on, I think we're on the same page, and then you start on these different roads. So you're actually saying, with a straight face, presumably, that Bernie Sanders, who ran a totally easy campaign against Hillary Clinton, took issues off of the table instead of attacking her like any normal candidate would do, then nominated her at the convention, then did, I believe, over 30 appearances for her, including in places like Michigan, where she refused to campaign through a combination of arrogance and incompetence. You're saying that this was all a giant act of him being patronizing?
Condescending, supercilious. It's like holding the door open for the woman, saying, "You can't do it without me, Bernie Sanders." It was degrading, frankly. And I like Bernie, and I want all the things he wants. But as a man, we have to ask ourselves, you know, I have a daughter. Do I want her being propped up by an old white man like Bernie Sanders? I think it was offensive, and I think that's why Hillary lost.
So in other words, because Bernie Sanders supported her and campaigned across the country for her and worked as hard at for her, that's why she lost.
It was solicitous. It was unnecessary. He was saying a woman can't win without me. And I think a lot of people in the blue wall, in the Rust Belt, said, "Hey, she's weak. Bernie's right. She's weak. She needs a guy." So, yeah, I think, hey, look, I want everything Bernie wants. I'm a Bernie bro. But I have to ask myself, what would Martin Luther King do? And he would say, check your gut. And I checked my gut, and I'm thinking maybe there's a little misogyny on Bernie's part. You know, Elizabeth Warren, for example. You know, I want to talk about the endorsement, but, you know, I'm for revolution, not evolution. You know that about me, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Revolution, not evolution. I am Bernie all the way. But I have to say, if Bernie told Elizabeth Warren in a private conversation that a woman can't get elected president, then I got to reconsider. If Bernie's a misogynist, then I want evolution, not revolution.
Wow. So basically, you're saying that based off of a report, a leak by somebody either in the Warren campaign or somebody close to Warren, or maybe some journalists that Warren presented her side of the conversation about. And even though we have video of Bernie Sanders going back to the 1980s, encouraging women to run for office, saying that there could be a woman president, that you believe Warren's version of this story for no apparent reason, and also that because of a private comment that there's a dispute about, you don't believe in things like Medicare for all anymore.
I believe in everything Bernie believes. I do. But if he said a woman can't get elected, then I'm not so sure health care is a human right. I'm not.
Brandon, can you help me here?
I don't think there's anything wrong with a little bit of a light negging between friends, you know?
No, I'm just saying I want everything Bernie wants, but if it turns out in a private conversation he expressed doubt that a woman can't be Donald Trump, then I think we have to go much slower on reducing the price of prescription drugs. And that's my taking a good long look in the mirror as a woke male and keeping it real, which is,
That's what Dr. King would have said.
Dr. King would tell me to do that. I think the problem with your show, and I'm a big fan of yours, I'm a Bernie bro, but I think we have to lay off these purity tests.
Right.
Like Lula, for example. You like Lula. You interviewed Lula.
Yes. Big fan of Lula.
He's my hero. He's your hero, even though he has a prison record.
Well, he was a political prisoner, David.
He was. I don't care. See, that's the difference. I don't need to know why he went behind bars. He paid his price. He paid his debt to society. He's out. This is you with the purity tests.
Well, he
committed. I don't know.
Well, he was released because the Intercept, actually, Glenn Greenwald's now getting politically persecuted by the Brazilian regime. They actually showed that the prosecution of him was corrupt from the outset. They demonstrated, so the Supreme Court was shamed into letting him out temporarily.
But whatever. The point I'm making, he's a great guy. That's the point. I don't have purity tests. Dr. Martin Luther King.
Right.
You've seen the mugshots. He was arrested countless times. But I measure the entirety of the man.
Right.
No purity test. Dr. Nelson Mandela, he did time. Dr. Malcolm X, he did time. Dr. Mahatma Gandhi, Dr. Eugene Debs, some of my favorite rap artists like Dr. Dre, they all did time. But I don't hold them up to purity tests like Michael Brooks does. Everybody has to be pure.
Well, I've actually been saying for a long time, I don't think so. I think you just need to have a solid political agenda. But so wait, are you saying? I just want to understand where you're coming from.
I'm a Bernie bro. I'm a socialist from before you were born.
Before we were born.
Okay.
So let's get back to that in a second. So in 1964, we all know that LBJ said any number of horrible things. Barely. Right. Probably he did say it in front of the press. They just didn't report it then. He said racist stuff. He said anti-Semitic stuff. He said sexist stuff, all sorts of stuff. So if you heard him say those things, would you then be neutral between him and Goldwater, or say that he shouldn't sign the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act? I mean, I'm just doing your logic here, David.
I resent your challenging my liberal bona fides. My grandfather marched in Selma with Bull Connor. He worked for Bull Connor. And for you to challenge my bona fides is offensive to me.
Wait a second. You think it's a liberal bona fides that your grandfather Bull Connor was the terrorist sheriff who was sicking dogs and hoses and God knows what else that we don't even have historically established on civil rights marchers. So
now we're blaming dogs for racial intolerance. Let's move on, okay? Let's just.
All right, David. You know what, David? I'm getting fed up. Okay, the New York Times first they totally they didn't give Bernie a fair shake at all, which we knew was going to happen. And then they did something that was just utterly embarrassing, which if you were a Warren supporter, which I'm beginning to suspect you are, you have all of the markings.
No. Bernie.
Really?
Bernie.
So you're going to vote for Bernie?
I would have voted for Bernie in 2016. I would have voted for him.
You would have? Well, you could have voted for Bernie. What happened?
I know, but I voted for Hillary. But I would have voted for Bernie if I could, but I couldn't. I voted for Hillary.
Oh, well, why couldn't you have voted for him?
I just couldn't. I wanted to.
Okay.
Because I'm a lefty from way back. Way back.
Brandon, do you have anything to add here?
All I can say is, you know what doctor hasn't been behind bars? Dr. Henry Kissinger.
I'm sorry?
Ooh,
I'm sorry?
David, listen to Brandon.
I was going to say, you know what doctor hasn't been behind bars? Dr. Henry Kissinger. Maybe we should, take a little lesson from him. You can get your doctorate without, serving time, which most people don't know.
Dr. Henry Kissinger.
Dr. Henry Kissinger, Reverend Dr. Hillary Clinton, Reverend Dr. The Reverend Dr. Sister Hillary Clinton.
The Reverend Dr. Sister Hillary Clinton. Absolutely. So you hate Henry Kissinger, though, because you're a lefty.
I hate Henry Kissinger, yes. And I think there's something appealing about the New York Times endorsing two people. I think that's good.
But
it's all about choice. It's a good look. Big Ten thinking.
Wait, Brandon has another question for you.
Not to play devil's advocate, but what do you do in a situation where you're in a primary and you've been told that you can vote for either Warren or Klobuchar and it's just fine? Either one is fine. How is that information actionable? If you're in Iowa, who do you vote for?
Well, it's a good question because we have someone like Amy Klobuchar who says we shouldn't dream big. That's good. And then there's Elizabeth Warren who says there's nothing wrong with dreaming big, so long as those big dreams never come to fruition. That's also good. So I like that choice going in and then calling an audible. I like that freedom at the last minute to choose between Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren.
Wait a second. Wait. You just distilled this, that Amy Klobuchar says we shouldn't dream big, and Elizabeth Warren says there's nothing wrong with dreaming big, just as long as those dreams don't come into fruition.
Yeah. Well, obviously, again, I'm a Bernie bro.
Right.
From way back. But you didn't, the two of you obviously you didn't read the New York Times endorsement because it's really a choice between charisma and storytelling. If you read the editorial, they praised Elizabeth Warren for her storytelling ability. But they didn't specify which story. Was it the one about her Native American heritage? Was it the one about never taking money from a super PAC? Or was it the one about how she's going to fight for Medicare for all? They didn't specify which story, so I found that lacking. Whereas they also said, if you're in the mood for charisma, Amy Klobuchar. I have to agree. So I'm leaning towards Amy Klobuchar because I think the New York Times made a better case for Amy Klobuchar's charisma than they did for Elizabeth Warren's. Yeah, she had Midwest charisma.
Oh, my God.
Like when she eats an egg salad sandwich with her comb instead of a fork. Although, when you think about it, that's not really charisma. That's just her being an enchantress. I find that. And they praised her style of leadership, Michael. Bernie talks about this revolution, but Amy's all about leadership, leading from behind, like when she berates her staff and throws coffee cups at them, says they're dim-witted community college dropouts. That's how you spark the loyalty necessary to mobilize a mass movement of Americans desperately thirsting for moderation.
Well, I mean, yeah. Oh, wait. So, okay, the New York Times writes in their endorsement, reports of how Senator Klobuchar treats her staff give us pause. They raise serious questions about her ability to attract and hire talented people.
The problem is her staff is stupid.
I love they just double-negged the staff. Absolutely abusing your staff we're not that concerned about, but if you abuse them too much, you're only going to be able to get Dunskies.
Right.
Is that how
Can I just say something? Can I just say something about your attitude and Mr. Sutton's attitude?
Yes.
Your snarky attitude?
Yes.
She throws coffee cups at her staff, right? She berates her staff.
Yes.
But if a man did that, you know what people would say? They'd say, can you imagine if a woman did that? So let's back off with the double standards once removed. What I'm saying here is second wave double standards, Mr. Sutton. And this is this new double standard once removed. Okay? So ask yourself, yes, Amy Klobuchar throws rocks and at her staff, but suppose a woman did that. Ask yourself that. What would you say?
I guess it's okay then.
I'm actually not too down on Amy Klobuchar. I can't spell her name, but I will say that I find her dedication to vibrating at a pleasing frequency quite, it's. I don't know who told her what.
She has excuse me for 1 second, okay, Donald Trump. She has a condition, okay? She's scared shitless.
Is that really it? Because she vibrates at a distraction.
You are making fun of people who are scared shitless. I happen to have a son who's scared shitless, and I don't have a sense of humor about people who were born scared shitless. You smug lefties. I'm sorry, and I'm a Bernie bro. You know that.
Well, I'm increasingly not knowing that, David.
She's Amy Klobuchar. I mean, it's hard to find much sunlight between her and Bernie in many ways.
Well, I want to go back to Warren for a second because it really, you do, and no offense, David, but I just think as we listen to you talk, not wanting to actually achieve anything, but wanting the sort of brand of wanting to have big change, you do sound like a Warren person.
I am. Well, no, I mean, she's my first choice.
Wait a second. Wait. I thought Bernie was your first choice.
Well, my Bernie is my. If I have no second choice, then I'm voting for Elizabeth Warren. Her father was a janitor?
Yes, I did know that.
And what's great about Elizabeth Warren is that's all we know about her father, that he was a janitor.
Do you like that she calls him daddy at times? Do you think that that's the kind of folksy thing that will flip a Trump voter to her?
Well, I'd suggest that she also call him Meemaw. She should call him Meemaw, too.
Now, I know, David, I know that for a long time, and including people like me who've been critical of Warren, we both, because Donald Trump obviously attacked her in a racist way, and because I'm actually not into purity politics, but also because people are very policing and very controlling around the parameters of what you can critique about Warren. But people like me didn't mention anything about her saying she was a Native American for decades, or her recipe that she put in a recipe book that she said was a family recipe, but all of that. And I've always said
powwow chow.
And I've always said, hey, you know what? Even if you don't want to, and plenty of Native American people still find this to be deeply offensive, but even if you don't want to go to the merits of the case, as much as, you can be uptight and whatever in a Democratic primary, obviously Donald Trump's going to dine out on it. And it might be a real vulnerability for her, for a broad set of voters who find it, phony and dishonest and weird. I've heard you talking. I haven't heard any doctors. I haven't heard about Dr. Leonard Peltier as an example. But you surely should be concerned about
her authenticity,
and also how offensive it is to so many members of the Native American community.
Whoa. That's her identity, my friend. She's being authentic, lying about her ethnic heritage and pretending that she can let her hair down and have a beer with you. That's her identity. That's authentic. That's an authentic Harvard technocrat, and she has every right to exercise her culture without you passing judgment on being a Harvard technocrat. I find you intolerant.
So I've also heard that because it was demonstrated by the Boston Globe that she did not get her job because she claimed she was Native American, but she did let Harvard list that they had a Native American on faculty. She did the powwow chow. You don't think this is a problem?
She's always offering to have a beer. Have a beer with Elizabeth Warren. She has a drinking problem, obviously. That suggests some, perhaps. The Native Americans have a problem with drinking, so obviously there's something there. And the thing that you don't understand as a white male,
right? Well, wait, Brandon is not a white male. Excuse you.
Yeah, but he could pass for a white male. He's got that white male attitude. You're not a woman, Brandon. You're not a woman. And, not only am I a Bernie bro from way back, but I believe in women. And right. I have treated women with respect before they even deserved any. That's how far. And I don't know what it's like over at the Michael Brooks show, but I found out that women get paid 70 cents on the dollar. When I found that out, I immediately began paying all the women on my show 80 cents on the dollar across the board. No questions asked.
This is what an ally looks like and sounds like. I want you to take note. I want you to take note,
exactly,
Michael.
Brandon.
I know. I got a lot
Brandon,
to learn.
Thank you.
We all have a lot to learn, to be frank. It's.
Did you know that Amy Klobuchar? This is what I like about Amy Klobuchar.
Yes.
And again, I'm a Bernie bro, but I have to say, you may not know this about Amy Klobuchar, but her father was an alcoholic who was married 3 times and ended up completely broke on Medicaid. And, she doesn't like to talk about that unless it's on national television in front of millions of people because she respects her father's privacy. And that's what I'm looking for my daughter. I'd like to think that when my daughter runs for president, she'll respect my privacy the way Amy Klobuchar respects her father's privacy. Because in the end, the one thing I want the world to know about me is that I was an alcoholic, divorced 3 times, and ended up flat broke.
You know what, David? I can barely take any more of this. Don't you think that if you, and clearly you're some type of Warren, Klobuchar, whatever, shouldn't both of these candidates be pissed? Because it would have, I mean, I don't think a New York Times endorsement is such a big deal outside of a certain very, very narrow segment of the population, which Elizabeth Warren was probably doing pretty well in anyways, along with Mayor Pete. But at the same time, a good, clean endorsement would have been good for her. And Klobuchar, the media keep trying to make her happen, but she's never happening. That would have been a real thing if she had a straight up endorsement. Aren't they sort of in this really try hard way actually hurting both of these candidates by making this ridiculous dual endorsement?
Michael. I didn't want to do this, but I'm going to use a very sophisticated term, and it's going to be intimidating.
Yes.
So get ready to bend to my hyper-educated, technocratic will. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm going to explain the New York Times endorsing 2 people. And I'm going to use a term you've never heard before, which means you and Brandon are going to discover that I'm smarter than the both of you because I'm using a term you've never heard before. So you'll trust my judgment. because I know this term and I speak 7 different languages.
Oh my God, what is the term? Jesus Christ.
I just want to set this up so you know I'm better than you. I'm better, but I'm going to help you. Okay? Because I'm hyper educated.
Right.
But I'm looking out for you. I'm looking out for you in a paternalistic way. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, be prepared to hear how much smarter I am than you. And this will explain the New York Times editorial.
Yes.
Are you prepared?
I'm prepared.
Okay, here's the term. Get ready to feel inferior and ask me for guidance. Okay, here's the term. Cognitive dissonance. See how smart I am? You see how smart? I just used a term. Okay?
Look.
So listen, I'm not lording it over you. Okay?
Hey.
I happen to know the meaning of cognitive dissonance,
Well,
and you don't.
I might, and I don't see how this is helping your case.
No, I'm just trying to show you that you should kind of, with all due respect, keep your mouth shut and let a technocrat like me decide what you really need without having to listen to you. Okay? In other words, I'm better educated. I have more diplomas. I'm not better than you. I'm just entitled to a much bigger slice of the pie than you are. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
What about Brandon? You entitled? Brandon happens to have, I believe, a PhD.
Brandon?
No, I do not.
Okay,
Brandon?
just short of a PhD.
Just short of a lot of things.
Just short of a PhD.
Because he has
That's fantastic. But listen, I want you to have a good life. So long as it doesn't cost me anything. And your child doesn't take up a space at an exclusive private school reserved for my kid. Because, if you get in the way of my child, I will cut you. But other than that, we all want the same things.
David, wasn't that enough? Do you think that Elizabeth Warren telling an activist that her kids were public school educated, even though they mostly went to private school, that might be another thing that could be a problem against Trump?
Well, that's cognitive dissonance, being able to keep 2 opposing ideas in your head, the facts and the truth. And that's what you learn going, when you live at Harvard, you learn to keep 2 separate ideas in your head. That comes with intellectual rigor. I'm for Medicare for all. I'm not for Medicare for all. That's what an intellectual does. She has the ability to see both sides of an issue.
Right.
On one hand, healthcare is a moral issue. On the other hand, I have health care, so who gives a shit?
But my question is, I don't care about this in relation to Bernie because I don't think it is that meaningful. It would have been funny if they endorsed Bernie. It would have shown that they had some self-reflection. But isn't just offensive to Warren and Klobuchar?
Well, that's what I was trying to say.
Sorry?
Is it not just offensive? Is it not just offensive to Warren and Klobuchar? I mean, I'm not a big fan of Warren or Klobuchar, but I can acknowledge that their politics and their policy prescriptions are different. They have different prescriptions for society to a certain.
Well, yeah. I mean, Klobuchar tells us not to dream.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth Warren says we can dream just so long as those dreams don't come.
Yeah, Klobuchar is the black pill fuck it candidate. Whatever. Let's just go buck wild. And Warren has ideas of various degrees. But isn't endorsing both of them just basically treating them as though they're interchangeable? Okay, well, you know what? Either Amy or Warren is fine. I mean, I imagine that there is just some theoretical person who is maybe 5 or 6 people all across America who were leaning towards Warren or Klobuchar. Now they're just left, without any kind of guidance. Shouldn't we think about that, person?
Okay, let me explain something to you, Mr. Sutton. You're short of a PhD, right? Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay, as a technocrat, I find your use of the words policy prescriptions to be somewhat anodyne and childish, if I may be so bold, because you will discover when you finally do get your PhD, you will soon discover that the American people are too stupid to understand policy prescriptions, okay? Because they don't have your PhD.
Well,
You will have to infantilize the American people, because how else do you justify all that work going towards your PhD? Do you understand what I'm saying? That if you have a PhD, it then follows that everyone else is stupid. So you can't discuss policy prescriptions with the American people. You have to tell them a story. Okay? This is something you will learn when you get your PhD, and you will begin to tell a story to the American people. Okay?
No, I mean, I agree with you a little bit. Not that people are too stupid to understand policy prescriptions, but that the idea that people don't care about policy has kind of been an underlying current to the Democratic Party's, like their brand for a while, for lack of a better word. But doesn't that just hurt, Warren? Like who, like, for, again, better or worse, whether I like her policies or not, she's a very policy heavy candidate. That's like her, main claim to fame. Doesn't that kind of...
Well, not really. Not really, because if you're part of the consultant class like I am, you have to push the idea that the American people are stupid, and you have to manipulate them with story that they can't grasp policy because I'm educated. And if I'm educated, that means other people have to be stupid, which means they can't understand the policy that I study to get my master's and eventually my PhD. This is something... I don't think you understand how this works.
I don't understand how anything works. But I'm of the opinion, honestly, if you had gotten any 12 people off the street, like just randomly, and put them in a room to interview all like the candidates, they would have asked better, more poignant questions than the New York Times editorial board. Like, had you just, gone out...
But they don't have PhDs.
I mean...
They don't have diplomas. How can you trust somebody without a diploma?
I mean, that's actually the problem, I think. When you spend all your time in academia or any of these like specialized, thought industries, for lack of a better term, you end up...
Are you proposing... Wait a second. Hang on for one second. Are you proposing some Hobbesian nightmare where somebody with a degree from Oklahoma State University could know as much as somebody who graduated from Yale?
I mean,
that's chaos. That's anarchy.
I've spent a lot of time over the past week watching Gilmore Girls, so my faith in Yale has been dramatically reduced. But I will say, no, I think that the problem we actually have with our technocracy is that they're not really experts in the classical sense. They don't have any like real claim to expertise, so much as they are like upper middle class yuppies who are allowed to pretend like they're experts because they're upper middle class yuppies. Like, I think a large part of Warren's like plans have unnecessary, essentially unnecessary positions baked in for the technocratic class when they're unnecessary. Oh, I said unnecessary twice, but when it shouldn't be a jobs program.
Hang on for one second. Certainly, you're not suggesting that working in a Warren administration should be anything more than a resume builder.
Yeah. I mean, we have this revolving door between public and private institutions that like it's hard to deny that it feels like a lot of these plans that call for we have to have this committee to investigate AI and facial recognition and the racial bias behind that. We have to have this this committee for this new agency to handle the bureaucracy of finding out or rather for handling the transition to Medicare for all. It feels like a lot of these things are just, well, I have all these stakeholders in my campaign. I have all these people who I know would be great in this position, but maybe the position doesn't need to exist in that function. Maybe we need to not necessarily get away from the idea of technocracy, like putting the right people in the right jobs, but get away from the idea that's what we have right now. Like I mean,
I hear you,
David.
I hear you. Okay,
make your final case here because we got to go to get to the post game. So first of all, I'm very angry at you. You came again on my show under false pretenses, and but nonetheless, you are here. So as Bill O'Reilly would say, you have the final word.
Okay, Mr. Sutton, I encourage this. I like a spirited debate. As long as I ignore your points and I shout louder than you do. Okay? So I agreed with, I enjoy a spirited debate. But let me just say something about Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. They have a story, okay? And that's what the New York Times understands, is they have a story. Bernie, who I love Bernie, but he doesn't have a story. He's never once held a competition to have a beer with him. I have no idea if Bernie Sanders was ever assaulted by his gynecologist.
Ooh.
Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't.
Yikes.
But it would be nice to know if he opened up about his personal life.
I'm pretty sure he's.
Joe Biden had a child who died. Okay, so for him, death is personal. Has anyone ever died in Bernie's life? Maybe. Maybe. I'd like to know if Bernie ever had someone he loved die. That's something we should know about a president. He needs to open up more. Otherwise, quite frankly, I'm for evolution and not revolution. Because
David Feldman, I hate you. You are.
I may disagree with your opinion, but I will fight to the death of me to make a fortune going on cable television news spouting nonsense.
David Feldman, host of the David Feldman Show. Thank you so much.
That was great. Are we still on?
Yeah, we're still on.
You know what?
Yes.
I hate myself. I see this inside of me. Like I know that there's a part of me that deep down that I could have been that guy. And it's just I want to join Opus Dei and just start beating myself.
It's perfect because we sit and we consume this character, like whether it's the Democratic Party leadership or the New York Times or MSNBC or like this thing that you're embodying, we have to deal with constantly in every way. It was like a couple of weeks ago. Do you know who Joe Lockhart is?
Yeah, the lobbyist for the health insurance company.
Yeah, this guy, he co-founded Glover Park Group after he was, I think he was Bill Clinton's press secretary. He co-founded a firm called Glover Park Group, which has worked for everything from the health insurance industry to the Saudi royal family to Verizon to they were also a big part of the Pete Peterson's cut the deficit austerity thing. And now he's on CNN. And what I also love is that he hosts a podcast called Words Matter, which is just incredible. It's like, this whole like fake news, people don't trust things world might have something to do with the industry that you were a pioneer of, my friend. And he put a tweet out where he said, Bernie just, he hasn't been scrutinized yet. And he's really good because he reminds everybody that he's a balls and strikes CNN analyst. And he's had plenty of good things to say about Bernie. And I quote tweeted it, and I said something to the effect of like, obviously it's ridiculous, and also maybe the co-founder of Glover Park Group will not be so thrilled about Bernie's electoral agenda. And his response, which was something to the effect of like, some type of middling response about Bernie, not getting scrutinized, whatever. And then the only other part about Glover Park Group was he was just, as for my record, feel free to criticize. Yeah, it's just perfect. Like, I just said you work for Verizon and the fucking Saudis. And they're like, well, feel free.
There is this really weird myth that's been going around for like at least 5 years as they've been criticizing Brenda. He's yet to be vetted. And it's hard to interpret that as anything other than like them expecting for this weird like bombshell, like, oh, he used prison labor at his Arkansas mansion to just come out and blow. Because like I think that people have been conditioned by like their terrible candidates that they support to have like these huge like otherwise disqualifying things come out, but being sort of shackled to the Democratic Party or Republican Party and having to ignore them. So like they're expecting that for Bernie, and like it's just not going to happen.
It's not. And then the things they think it's going to be, it's like the people who see him in a Soviet sauna are either going to be like, this is horrible, he's a communist, in which case that guy's already voting for Trump, or they're going to be like us and be like, can we use this to promote our Bell House show? That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, what was it? The week before the Warren thing dropped, they were criticizing him because he had a child out of wedlock and skipped Vietnam.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, yeah, that's awesome. It's like he fucks and fucked the army. Like, yeah, like exactly.
Right, yeah, like what you weren't supposed to fight in Vietnam.
It's just that's the wrong thing to do. But I think that just goes back to
and
what
also
we're
like out of wedlock. Like, are you kidding? Like, some people should look at some stats.
I don't know. I mean,
this country.
Vietnam was obviously an atrocity, but I think that the liberal class specifically, like that's not even liberal, but the centrist Democrat class, they take a certain amount of pride in their ability to like criticize things but go along with them anyway. Yes. Where it's like there's this very weird dynamic where they are incredibly, because like as Feldman made very clear by his bit. Sorry, I don't know but the word for it. Like they are comfortable. And so, like, they feel very comfortable in stepping outside of that system, and at least in their own opinion, and criticizing it, but then just swimming along with the current and not making waves. And they feel still like that ability to criticize but not change or not engage in any kind of action to change the problem that they're acknowledging, outside of in the most minor ways, is sufficient. Like it's a sufficient mechanism for changing. For like at least it's a sufficient enough to give them a level of moral superiority within our society that they feel differentiates them from the Republican Party.
Right.
Well, now you know what it is when you watch the debates. I noticed something. All the Democrats now are willing to state the problem, and they're even now willing to state the cause of the problem, but they're not willing to state the solution, except Bernie. And that to me is, I think it's worse than Trump. I think for Biden and Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren to go all the way up to the edge of income inequality and healthcare, but not take the leap to the solution, that's just sinful, because that just lulls the Democratic Party into being self-satisfied. I mean, yes, I know there's a homeless problem. Yes, it's terrible. Right. It's caused by the mental health problem, and yes, and it's caused by rents are too high. Yes, it's terrible. It's terrible. But what do we do about it? Well, that's complicated.
No, exactly. I think that's exactly. I have to just, actually make your point, and I'm going to go on a quick tangent before we get off.
Well, I mean, I think that like that dynamic you're describing is why we're in the situation that we're in, both when it comes to the Democratic Party's relationship with the Republican Party and also their relationship with Bernie Sanders. It's like when you want to score points by simply acknowledging the problem, like weaponizing the silence of the Republican Party on things like racism or sexism or like homelessness or mental health or any of these like sort of numerous societal issues we have, you have to kind of be, essentially using a far right party as your foil, people who won't even acknowledge the existence of these problems. So then you come out ahead, you say, hey, you know what? You see those stupid, morons on the far right. Forget the fact that they basically roll us every week. Forget that they roll us every week.
You know those fucking idiots who beat us all the time?
Who like just fucking like fucking
those morons who win every single major conflict we have with
who
them.
hand us our ass every week. You know those people? Like they don't even believe in racism or sex. They don't even know what intersectionality is. Like but we do. We're the smart, we're the morally righteous, the morally superior party, and they're just the dumbest.
The psychic payoff. That's another problem, is that so many people in that coalition, on the comfortable parts of the coalition, that's all they want. Yeah, they don't care about the material change.
Because then the fact that's the emotional component of it. But what that does, it creates a very hostile relationship with the far left, the people to the left of them, if not like friendly, a rivalry with the far right, because those people can be used as an intellectual and moral foil, because they're like the entire basis for their disagreement exist on the symbolic level. It can be okay, we acknowledge that racism is a problem. We acknowledge this, but using climate change as an example, it's like they want to do the same thing with climate change. They want to say we acknowledge the science of climate change. The Republican Party, they're stupid. They lack the intelligence. They're scientifically illiterate. They think that dinosaurs lived 1,000 years ago. We acknowledge the climate change, the science of climate change. We believe the consensus of those scientists. Well, what do you want to do about it? It's like, well, the Green New Deal, that's a little bit far. That's a little bit, radical. We would, like carbon tax or, some kind of offset. We'll plant a tree for every mountain we strip mine. Like that, like acknowledging the science of climate change, but then not really having the same level of, essentially drive to stop it. It doesn't make you seem smarter than the farmer. It makes you seem dumber. Like makes you seem dumber to say, I acknowledge the problem and the scope of the problem and the cause of the problem, but I'm not really in favor of the solution.
It's coherent. I mean, it's coherent. I have to just say really quick before we get off. I saw one time, I wish I could remember the context, but also the other thing about liberals in Vietnam is there's this like weird, because they're establishment about it and they can't just acknowledge that the thing was evil and a structural part of U.S. foreign policy or whatever. They have this, a lot of them who didn't go and fight really have this weird inferiority complex. That's why they had this bizarre worship of people like John McCain, and that's why they thought that John Kerry would be a slam dunk over George W. Bush, even though George W. Bush was like, hey, yeah, I got out of it. Now you're windsurfing, pussy. Which is how it actually works in real politics. But I remember one time on Hardball.
What? I'd rather be in Da Nang than have to sleep with Teresa Hines. But go ahead.
I actually disagree with that. I watched there was a Hardball once, and somebody, Chris Matthews was on some like Vietnam contingent, and I forget the guests, but she kind of was just like, basically doing the sort of like thing that you do at Matthews where you're just like, okay, I don't know about that, Chris. I think maybe blah, 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 blah. And he's just like, no, Vietnam was a very deep thing, particularly for the men of that generation. It's a certain thing. It's an emotional resonance, and it was Vietnam. And anyways, it was Vietnam, and that's why there's John McCain.
Right. That impression was so good, my ear is covered in spit. I don't know how you did that. Hey, you know what? I know you want to.
We got to run, David.
Finish, but can I just make a suggestion?
Sure.
And I'm being serious.
Yes.
Forget Medicare for all. VA, Veterans Affairs for all. Bring back the draft. And not just because I hate my children. Everybody should have to serve in the military or the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps. 2 years of your life. Everybody in public service, you do that, and then you're entitled to VA benefits. So it should be VA for all.
All right, David, this is very. I see you at the pavilion watching a JFK speech right now. David,
I don't get.
That was very 60s.
Oh, in Milwaukee?
Yeah, somewhat. I don't know. It's just very JFK of you. Anyways, David Feldman. I love you.
I love you guys.
Subscribe.
Are we still on, or is this?
All right, bye-bye. Subscribe to the David Feldman Show. He's such a troll. Subscribe to the David Feldman Show on iTunes. We really got to get to postgame. We're running way late, so we're going to have a little bit of a shorter postgame than usual. Patreon.com/TMBS. Grab your tickets to the Bell House. TMBS.FM. Brandon.
Oh, yeah. You can follow me on Twitter at Pretty Bad Lefty, and you can listen to my podcast on SoundCloud. It's called The Discourse. It's also on iTunes and Spotify. They let me on all of the outlets. That's so surprising.
And you can become a patron of it, which I have, and you should too.
You should definitely become a patron of the. You can, I can afford better, nicer sweaters.
It's a nice sweater. See you guys in the post game.